So, welcome everyone to Building Generational Wealth. I'm Caroline Ceniza-Levine from the Dream Career Club and Analiza Wolf, executive coach and podcast host and multiple time author. Go ahead, take it away.
It is so nice to be here with my friend, fellow executive coach Caroline, and for you all joining. Thanks for being here. As Caroline mentioned, I am an executive coach along with Caroline. We both support leaders. I wanted to mention that we're also friends, and as fellow Filipinas, mothers, daughters, talking about work, we have also talked about life. How might we build our own wealth? How might we pass wealth down? What does it mean to build wealth? So this what we're sharing today is both personal, also professional. Quick story, my parents immigrated from the Philippines to the US, didn't have much, but they had big dreams for my brother and me. And along with those dreams, it was this message of work hard, study, go to a good school, get a good job, and then you'll be taken care of. My parents both worked at their jobs, my dad in the military, my mom a nurse for like their whole career, like one company. So, when I tried to follow in their footsteps of, going to a good school and getting a good job, the rules have changed. And what has been interesting professionally when I've coached women, particularly women of color, so many incredible badass women at the top roles, like CEO level, have told me, I haven't thought about this longer term plan. What does retirement look like? What does generational wealth look like? I just haven't invested. I mean, it's just, I was like, but you're an incredible leader. And they said, I know, but I just haven't focused on this area. So I'm kind of in a tough spot. So I thought this is an important point, not just personally, but also we need to support each other. That I know we're trying to make a difference in our work, but that also means in building wealth, because by having wealth, we're not only able to, enrich ourselves and our future generations, but we're also able to invest in those causes that mean something to us, politicians that we agree with, and really amplify the impact we want to have. Caroline, do you want to share anything about personal motivation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I echo everything that you say, and I think now is the right time to be having this conversation um, because we are in really a sea change, I feel like, in terms of career. So my world is career. I like to stay in my lane, but I agree with you, Analiza, that I have worked with very senior, talented professionals who earn multiple six figures, sometimes seven figures. And yet, when it comes time to making some key decisions about where to go in their career, sometimes they are stymied by the fact that they've built themselves a lifestyle that they can't afford or that they can't afford to take risks with, which I thought was so interesting because, again, like you, I felt like, oh, but you're this leader in your career, and surely then the money will follow. But that is not always the case. I would say, too, that now is particularly a good time because of disruptive technology. So I'm calling out AI. I will say that I really started to think very hard about this topic of generational wealth. And it is not just about passing on to your kids specifically. I could be talking to a single childless professional, and generational wealth still matters because it's this notion of not outliving the money that you have, that you are building something that can go on and on with something like AI and with the markets being really volatile right now, just in terms of geopolitics and just the general economy. I do think this notion of relying on any one job or any one career is not realistic right now. And the last time I saw such a big sea change was actually in the early 90s when the 401k was just starting to get traction. Now it is very well accepted that the traditional pension has disappeared and that you have to be your own money manager. But in the early 90s, when I mentioned this at family discussions, I got people shouting me down saying that's not going to happen. And of course, it happened. And so similarly, I'm seeing just a lot more hiring volatility, not because AI is replacing jobs right now, but because it's actually replacing budget. So many companies are spending much more on their technology now and really being gun shy about hiring. And so part of playing good defense at a time like this, yes, is good career planning, but it's also good financial planning. So that really is my reason for hosting this, for co-hosting this with you, Analiza, because I was like, we have to tell our audience, we have to help our audience with this because it is definitely an issue right now.
Wonderful. So Caroline mentioned this earlier about generational wealth. And regardless of being, I've got multiple generations after me, children, it's helpful because we're thinking about both knowledge and we're thinking about power that we get to take care of ourselves. There's a snowball effect. So starting earlier helps ourselves. Imagine like a snowball, right? It's amplifying, accelerating, growing bigger the earlier we do it. And it's not like, oh, shoot, I'm not 22. It's fine at this age to think about it, think about retirement. And if you do have a family, it can change trajectories, right? The next generation will have it a little bit less hard. And so how do we do that? How do we amplify impact? While Caroline also mentioned that we are not financial experts or planners, so obviously all of this is with our own experience, and you need to talk to your own financial advisors and do your own research. We did think that there was some helpful information because honestly, I remember Caroline, when we were talking about it, I said, hey, do you mind if we talk about this thing called money? And Caroline, of course, being Caroline, was like, absolutely, let's talk about the hard things. Let's go. And we have to say why. Why is it so hard to just go up to your buddy and say, how much do you make, right? Or how might I negotiate? Caroline's an expert on negotiation. How can I negotiate for more? And it's through multiple reasons baked into society and beliefs. It's anxiety. This 85% of Americans feel anxious about money, and it's even more anxious now with all that's going on. It also feels taboo. How can I possibly discuss finances? I don't feel comfortable. Over half said that. And they would rather, over 2/3, have a dentist visit, which can be very painful. I'd rather have that than discuss my numbers, which, I don't want to look at those numbers. It feels really uncomfortable. And then this idea, and I've seen this when I've coached particularly women leaders, negotiation for money. How could I be so greedy? I mean, it's about serving the children. It's about helping others. How can I put a number to that? It's a very greedy thing. I don't want to get in conflict either. So all of these make sense then why a topic like this feels hard to discuss. Caroline?
I would just add that I think sometimes people make it more complex than it might be, and therefore don't know the right questions to ask, or they oversimplify on the other side. So when I've broached the subject, because it comes up in career planning when we are talking about compensation, right? It's like either your target compensation or where you are now, or getting yourself back up to market, or perhaps taking a risk and moving to a different career where you might either have to take a pay cut or look at a slower growing pay cycle, or maybe you're starting a business and there's risk to that. I usually find that when I'm talking about, well, okay, so how much are we talking about here? How much do you spend every month? What are your actual obligations? Sometimes, and I'm talking even senior clients can't answer that to a degree of certainty where they need to in order to plan. So I do think there's a knowledge issue, and I don't mean knowledge about financial instruments. I mean just knowledge around your own numbers, knowing how much you spend, how much you already have, how much you are projected to have, in a 5, 10, 15 year, realistically speaking. So I do think that stymies people in terms of their planning.
So Caroline alluded to this. We're going to spend a little bit of time here because it's always helpful, I think, when you're getting a presentation to do a little bit of practical application. And looking at your numbers, no one else is going to see this. How much in a year do you bring in, right? With your salary or your business, your income. If you have anything else like books, like what are your income sources and what's your number? So ballpark is fine. Just put your sticky note next to you, write that number down, what's your income for the year. And then let's do that for expenses. If you know that monthly, multiply that by 12. You're bringing in all of your expenses, whether it's electricity, your phone bills, larger expenses like rent. So put those in, just generally speaking. What is that number? It's okay to make guesses. Just put that in here. Let's do that for debt. So these are your loans. Maybe you have credit card debt, student loan debt, home ownership debt, all that debt. What payments do you, or what do you have in debt? Just generally speaking, what's out there that you need to pay back? And then lastly, assets. So maybe you own real estate, or you have a business, you have an IP, you might own art. So put a number on that.
Well, 401k in your bank
401k.
account and, some more traditional paper assets as well, of course.
Yep, stocks. Thanks, Caroline. So it's okay if you don't know the specific numbers, but if you put a ballpark down, have an idea of that because it helps set the table a bit for this conversation. And as you reflect on your income, expenses, debt, and assets, let's delineate the difference between budget and generational wealth. Because when we talk about budget, right, we're talking about those top two lines. How much am I bringing in per month? What are my expenses per month? What does that look like? Maybe I'm paying off debt. What does that look like? What does that balance sheet look like? At the same time, you are also, while you're budgeting, this is different than generational wealth. In this case, you're talking about, Caroline mentioned your financial assets, the stocks, also those real estate, art, ownership of the business. And those things in general can grow in value over time. So different than I'm working a job, I'm showing up. This is what I'm making each month because I'm showing up. Generational wealth is talking about these assets that grow in value over time. And maybe you're not even working on the business because it's a stock, right? It's still growing as you sleep and generally increase over time. Here's how this relates then back to that graph, right? For budgeting, you're focused on income, expenses, paying off your debt. Assets is that fourth box here. That in our day-to-day, as you're getting support from Caroline on how to negotiate, let's bring that number of income up. You're not necessarily talking about the assets. That's less obvious. I got my MBA, we focused on financial, how to help build an organization, how to, mergers and acquisitions. This is not like your typical, let's focus on the assets. This is part of your standard curriculum of a job. So this idea of assets, right? We're delineating that, okay, here's my income, here's my expenses. This is the immediate needs that I've got to support. Wealth is different because it talks about those assets that either you're building for yourself for retirement or you're passing along to children or your grandchildren. And that is beyond income and that actually in general will appreciate in value over time. Caroline, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would just say like an easy way to think about it are assets or things that will pay you if you're not working. Right now, you have to potentially manage those assets. Like you have to take care of your house and you have to hopefully pay attention to your 401k statements and make sure that you don't get ripped off with fees and such and that you're invested properly. But you're not trading your time for money. Essentially, you're actually building something that is going to outlive you and outlast you. And where if you didn't do anything, you're still going to get a little bit of interest on your bank account. You're hopefully still going to get some dividends or some appreciation from your stock. If you have rental real estate, you're going to be collecting those rents. And those things are irrespective of whether or not you're working at a job. or not. And that's why, for me, it was really, gosh, when I look at what is happening in the economy and how companies are changing where they're investing, and every recruiter that I'm talking to is seeing starts and stops with searches and so many companies changing their mind about what they need. I do think we are in a sea change as to what careers are going to look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so untethering your livelihood from any one job or your career in general, I think is so, so, so important now. That's what I think about when I think of assets.
In addition, Caroline, I've seen articles that you've posted that it doesn't mean, oh, shoot, if I have a job, I don't have to worry about it, right? You can actually protect yourself by having different sources of income, whether it is, okay, I have a job, but also I have these other income streams, these assets that are building that will help cushion me if anything does happen, which unfortunately there's, it's constantly swinging. So I do want to mention that it's not like one or the other, right? You can have a combination of ways to build wealth and also protect yourself.
For sure. I mean, most of our listeners, most people who follow either of us, are in that bucket where your ability to earn a salary, your salary is probably your biggest asset. You will earn millions of dollars in your lifetime if you look at a 30, 40-year career. So for sure, your career is an asset. But for purposes of this discussion, where we're talking about wealth that goes on and on, obviously when you retire, you don't have your career anymore. When you pass, you don't have your career anymore. So it's really thinking about, okay, then how do we ensure that the next generation, whether we define that as kids or as charities and causes that we care about, or simply just knowing that we don't have to rely on any one thing, that's the generational wealth asset portion.
This as I was talking to different people about this, one of the concerns, challenges that I raised is, how am I supposed to think about such, generational wealth, the next generation, even retirement, when I've got like a lot of responsibilities right now? I've got this mess of an environment here. I'm just trying to survive, keep my career. I need to upskill, but that costs money. Then there's these issues of I'm a sandwich generation. I'm taking care of not just children, but my parents. That cost a lot of money and time. And then whatever money I can put away, I'm going to try to put into retirement. So these are real challenges, and there are more challenges. And so we're going to offer some thoughts about this. And that is that there's this balanced view, right? How can I take care of immediate needs while also having this view that I want to be able to retire eventually, right? And also have something to pass along if I have people to pass along to. And having a number to that is important. We talked about budgeting and how that's different than assets. And here we're talking about, well, what would it take to retire? What does it look like to have a lifestyle, say in Florida with Caroline, or in Costa Rica? She'll talk about that later. How much does that cost? What would it take if I live till 95 or 100? Like what is the cost amount of that? Having those numbers, those budgets, but there's also the non-financial pieces that will help protect. Caroline, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I just want to invite folks, to use the chat, by the way, since we are talking about challenges. And if it prompts something for you in terms of, gosh, I came to this call to deal with XYZ, definitely post that, because we would love to take questions and actually take this out of the theoretical and make it very practical and actionable for everybody who's on this call live. But the non-financial investments, yeah, this came up, Analiza, when we were talking about, what are some things that people can do if they feel entirely strapped, right? If they feel like they're spending every last nickel and dime and don't feel like they can move the needle in terms of actually making any investments. Because your career and your ability to earn income is one of the largest assets, anything that you can do to strengthen that, from an offense strategy, saying, okay, how can I grow my skills and expertise so that I can command more in the job market? From a defensive strategy, it's also just thinking about, gosh, how do I ensure that the job that I have is secure? or that I'm making the most of the job that I have. And so things like volunteering in strategic roles that will actually grow your skills and expertise, that can include taking a board position at a nonprofit, which is many times a gateway into boards and advisory roles for for-profit companies. Teaching. So that is a great way to demonstrate your expertise. You don't have to be a tenure track professor. You can be an adjunct. It was a big, big boost for me, both on the business side and the career side, to be an adjunct at Columbia University. People have heard of Columbia. It's a good talking point. Even things like being active in your professional association, strengthening that network. Again, that's a defensive strategy too, because the strength of your network will enable you to jump in and out of the job market as needed. People hire people. And so to the extent that you have a varied and supportive network that hears about opportunities, that's willing to refer you to opportunities, that adds to your wealth portfolio for sure. So it is not just about, I need to have X amount of dollars or a single dollar to invest. You can do things right now, at least to shore up the career angle, which is for sure an asset in your portfolio.
So with those challenges, we want to move into some strategies, and these are not like all the different strategies, but ways in which Caroline and I thought we would be able to share our personal examples in hopes that it might, provide a window for questions if you have them now, or just ideas that you have for yourself. So let's go with the first strategy. And I want to just bring us to this book. You probably have heard of it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, by Robert Kiyosaki. And this concept is helpful because when I first introduced my story about my parents, it's very similar to this sort of poor dad concept that Kiyosaki, his own father, and he's Japanese, right? He talks about his father, and his father says to his son, Kiyosaki, he says, you get a good job, right? You get a good job, and you get that through having a good education, follow these conventional career paths. The key is to save money, don't risk too much, get a good home. And this whole idea is that, we're working, we're going to get money through our job. That's going to, allow us then to survive, right? To survive. And so this is like the poor dad concept that Kiyosaki mentions. And he says, you know what, there's another way to think through this, which is Kiyosaki's friend's father, who is an entrepreneur. And he said, it's not about, having this, it's about independence. You're not looking for a job, for money. You're actually trying to get money work for you. And you're trying to get this independence through, as Caroline mentioned earlier, these assets that continue to grow, to build, even as you sleep, right? Even as you aren't working, they're still working for you. And so he talks about investing in these different assets like real estate, maybe owning your own business. And through this and educating, yes, but financial education, you escape the rat race. And so these counter ideas then, as Kiyosaki says, actually let me pursue a different route than what my father taught me and build wealth for myself, which he did. A few strategies that he employed and that he advises others to do is about assets. Again, we're going to that assets, that fourth quadrant here. How can we do that? And then if you remember the third quadrant with about debt, try to avoid that, right? Credit cards, these high interest rates, places that suck cash. Think about the long-term plan. Always learn about money. You're building your own skill set, but also learning what are the best ways to set up tax strategies. How can you manage your money for investing? Thinking about ways to make money. That's not just your paycheck, but how can I have these side investments? And Caroline and I want to talk about different ways that we've invested. Taking risks, because there are risks. So what's your risk appetite? Especially if you're in the long run, the long game, what you can mitigate that risk. How can you build skill and being able to use these skills to grow your business? And then shifting from this idea of, I'm a worker bee to I'm an owner, and how can I create independence to these smart investments? Caroline, do you want to build on any of these ideas?
I think we are going to in the later strategies, but I think that if you haven't read Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's a great book for shifting your mindset and your attention away from just the traditional job earnings model to something else. I think that is the big um, value of the book. I think it's been proven later on that he actually made up the whole concept of there was no rich dad in his life. I think that kind of came out later on, but I think that the book still has value in terms of a teaching paradigm around thinking differently about your money. It certainly changed the way I think about money for sure. And one of his big takeaways was real estate, and that was definitely helpful for me in getting started. So I do recommend the book as well.
Caroline, beautifully laid up here. So let's talk about real estate, right? Generally speaking, we're looking at a longer time horizon here. Generally speaking, it tends to rise over value. And the beauty of this is that the money that you use for your real estate, you can pull out money and continue to invest it in other things. So get leverage. I did want to mention that, there are different ways that you can invest in real estate beyond your home, single family rental properties. But there's also ways that you can build, wealth. We're looking at currently multifamily units. How can we do this? Not just another home to rent, but how can you have perhaps an apartment building? Obviously, that requires more money. So can you get a group of investors together, family or friends, to invest in a property? Or if you can't afford that, perhaps you can go into a real estate investment trust, a way that you can have some stake in the ground as these pretty large organizations, companies are buying up properties and having more scale. Caroline and I often talk about real estate as a way that we've built wealth. And Caroline, would you mind sharing yours?
Sure. I mean, I have a mom and pop kind of rental portfolio. We have 10 units and they are in various states as well as in Costa Rica. We've tried different things. We've tried vacation rentals. We've tried long-term rentals. We do private lending for real estate. We've participated in large syndications. So we've done some more alternative things like farmland and, so vacant land, things like that. What I will say is, what I like about real estate is that for the everyday person, I think it's more intuitive than investing in some other things. I think we all are familiar with different neighborhoods. We all have a common sense knowledge of what makes a good property. For sure, there are things that I learned that I never realized until I became a landlord. Things like HVAC and plumbing and some of the other things that you might not just necessarily know if you've just been renting. But I do think that real estate, more so than certainly other investments that I've made, is very intuitive. And that's why I like it as a potential starting point. But again, we are not advising any particular investment strategy. It's more about just opening your mind around like, hey, these things are out there and maybe it's something that you can consider. For me, real estate was for sure the gateway out of working on my business so much. I was kind of hitting my head against the wall around how to grow my business. I had tried hiring people, I had tried subcontracting, I had tried licensing some of the traditional things to scale a services business, but nothing felt right. And it was actually only when I started doing real estate, which is very different from what my current business is, which, as people know here, is career advising and HR consulting. So when I started investing in real estate, that really freed me up from my business day to day. And so I do think it might be the same for some people on this call, that they might not realize that there is something that's out there that is actually not necessarily your career, but can be a supplement to that.
Yeah, just double clicking on that, Caroline. I want to mention that our jobs, right, could be passion jobs or they couldn't. So there's like, what do I do for service to have an impact? And then how do I make money? Sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. But what I sometimes find when I coach leaders, especially in nonprofit leaders, is we get them so they must overlap, right? The thing that I love, the thing that I want to give the world needs to be the thing that I make money in. Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe you make money through, say, real estate, and then you also offer your gifts to people who might not be able to afford them. And so you can have both, right? Have wealth and also share your gift, but it doesn't have to be the same thing. Okay, let's talk about our next strategy. This is going beyond real estate and talking in general about financial assets in general. Remember, we're not the financial experts or advisors, but in general, if you're looking to invest in the long term, that helps with compound interest, meaning, okay, I make some money this year, that money grows, and then that rolls into the next, like it continues to grow off that bigger pot, that snowball effect. Here it goes. If you go long term, of course, when you look at a stock, a graph of a stock's performance, it'll be up and down daily, right? Weekly, but over time, in general, it will accelerate up over, longer period horizon, which is why even having this conversation now, it's helpful to determine where can I invest so that there is a higher chance of it growing over time. I know for me, we've done investments, looked at mutual funds, indexes, also real estate investments through a trust, a REIT. But something that we've been exploring is how to invest in companies that have more risk, but perhaps more return. We have friends who have started companies, or are people we know who've started companies and they're looking for rounds of funding, friends and family funding. And we found that, this sounds like a good idea. It passes our test. We're willing to put some money in there. Know that it'll be captive for a bit, but there'll be a higher return if it gets bought or it starts to accelerate. Another thing we've thought about, or we've looked at, is investing with others, right? Investing with people we know, and making bigger sized investments that have more of a chance to have higher returns. So these are beyond, your fidelity investments, and looking at other ways to invest that allow for maybe a higher risk appetite, but potentially a higher return. Caroline.
Yeah, I just want to add that actually, as you, if this interests you, things like family and friends rounds and some of these alternative investments, I would just encourage you to start paying attention to people in your own network. It will also help your professional development in that way, and your career in that. It's another way of keeping in touch with people. And I've known many professionals who actually, start, whether it's consulting relationships or actual other jobs, because they become advisors to companies or they get involved with companies at an early stage. So again, just bringing it back to potentially more of the career planning and career management, just because we are not making specific investment advice. And I will add that for me with financial assets, my mind shift had to be more focused on the upside versus the downside. I'm a very risk averse investor. And so I was always so cautious about where I was putting my money. And what I didn't realize until later on was that sometimes, the downside is, okay, you put in, let's say, $1,000 for easy math and you lose the entire $1,000. But if there is an upside that could be 10 times that or 100 times that, how material really is the downside. So I was so focused on preserving capital really for the first, half of my life, that I didn't look enough, I feel like, at the potential upside. So I just bring that up to folks in case any of you are stuck in that same boat as me. But again, like, that's just one way of looking at it.
I think it's important, Caroline, you mentioned the risk averse, right? We tend to have the negativity bias toward, here's failure. It's like the chances of that are amplified versus what's the opportunity to actually grow and be successful. So let's talk about this, because both of us have started our own businesses, right? And it is, look, there are both success cases and also some really hardship here. Again, I'm only going to speak from my own experience. This is not advice, but to me, it's a way to thinking about, there's traditional employment, yes, but for me, how can I build wealth myself and have it continue to support me over a longer horizon? I don't plan on working, in a typical 9 to 5 job, not that this ever existed, but like I don't plan to continue to work like that for a long time. What I would love to do is be able to continue to coach to my older years. And so it's a great way to bridge toward that and also build wealth. I love these statistics. This is just something I pulled, that if you're a self-employed millionaire, you can get 7 million in general, based on statistics, in 12 years compared to 3 million in 25 years. So, there's some upside there. You've also got, both Caroline and I have books, right? And so we've written the books, we give talks on the books, and there's revenue that continues to come in monthly from that. And it also helps with intellectual property, things that we own that we continue to use, different presentations we give. We don't have to always rebuild from scratch. So for me, there's both a financial gain, but also just my own financial independence. Looking at work as a way to support my lifestyle instead of work being my life, right? Those are different. So Caroline, what would you say about business, your experiences starting a business, running a business?
I mean, I think that you captured it in that statistic about the 7 million versus the 3 million. I do think that starting a business, and it can be a consulting business, right? So it doesn't have to be a brick and mortar. I'm going to invest in inventory and I'm going to hire 100 people. It can be a solo consulting business. It's just a way of really taking your destiny in your own hands. So I think sometimes if you really want to control how much you're earning, I was in HR at the time that I started my own business, and there's just really a ceiling there because you're not on the revenue generating side when you're in HR. And so for me, being an HR consultant was a way of being that revenue generator for myself. But I am noticing that there are some questions streaming on the Q&A. So let's just wrap up with these other few strategies and then maybe jump into some of these great questions and then make this more practical, I feel like, for folks.
Sounds like Caroline. Okay, we're going to talk about FIRE. Caroline, this is your expertise, so please.
Yeah, I think we would be remiss without not, if we didn't mention this movement, the financial independent retire early movement. What I will say about this is that it is not a pipe dream. I would say that the biggest mindset shift for me was when I discovered this movement, and I discovered it in my 40s. And it took me from reading about it to executing 7 years. So it is not something where, oh my gosh, if I didn't start when I was 22 or 32, even, or 42, that it would be too late for me. And really, it is simply about creating a life where work is optional, where you have built up enough assets. So this is what we're talking about here with generational wealth, where you can retire from the job that you have. So it's not necessarily that you don't work. A lot of financial independence, they write about saving a lot of money or investing, very heavily early on. And obviously some of us can do that and some of us can't. For me, I got there by developing multiple streams of income. So that includes the rental income, that includes going into business for myself and building those assets, and then getting creative about how I earn and what I spend. And part of that was moving to Northeast Florida from New York City, making that my primary for tax reasons, for day-to-day cost of living reasons, and then also setting up an entire life in Costa Rica as a plan B. That was very important for me so that I knew that there was just a basic, this is where I could live, and I could take more risks because of that. That was a very low cost way of living. So that's what geo arbitrage is like really being specific about where you're living. So I'll leave it at that. And you can read more about it. I blog extensively about FIRE in Costa Rica FIRE, which is my personal blog. And it kind of lays out where I went from age 40 up until now to get to financial independence for myself.
Great. All right, last strategy, we'll move to questions. We're talking about wealth, but also this wealth is in our heads, right? And so building our own knowledge, building our own skill set, reading different blogs, including Caroline's blog. How do we get this knowledge ourselves, but also pass it along? So with our community, you can have community groups. I definitely have girlfriend groups. Caroline's included, right? We're talking about finance. What are you doing? How's that going? How much is healthcare? cost for you, what, like having this knowledge tribe, as well as passing it along to your children, right? Because often we think, okay, they're going to learn it at school, or eventually they'll learn it. It's not that way, right? So how do we share this knowledge, share it with our children if we have children? And with knowledge, you're also sharing mindset, because money isn't all the things. It definitely makes life easier. How can we live this abundant mindset and be really proactive with our financial systems instead of saying, oh no, I don't want to look at it, I'd rather see a dentist? It's just like, don't ask, like, let's not, don't even go there. So it's this beauty of abundance mindset and also knowledge gathering and sharing that we really want to stress.
Yeah, and I think the best thing about sharing too is that you learn differently when you're teaching something, right? So to the extent that you have to summarize for other people, this is what I'm doing, this is stuff that I've heard, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what I'm thinking. It really just forces you to get your thoughts together, to listen differently when you do hear of things. And I'll tell you, like, one of the biggest changes for me was I surrounded myself with different people. I got involved with real estate investors, with people who are in the fire community, and people who are constantly talking about, yes, this is not only possible, but very, very doable right now. It just changed how I looked at everything, how I looked at opportunity, how I looked at risk. So I do think this sharing community that Analiza is referring to, whether it's a single person, Analiza and I do it for each other, but then we're also part of other larger groups, right? So it's really just thinking about, what does that mean for you? It can be a single person, it can be an association that you belong to, but just get started.
And because we want to always share resources, here are just a few different books and even a few places you can get the credit report scores. So you should know, right, what those are for you. And we wanted to offer those to you. I mean, of course, if you have books too that you love, please feel free to chat them. We want to, make sure this is a tribe of sharing. You can see Kiyosaki's books there. I didn't know that the poor rich dad not being real, but the concepts are very helpful. And there's also women books here too. We did want to close out. Here's our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us. We want to continue the conversation, whether it's career stuff or it's, leadership work. We're about supporting the whole person, right? We're not just workers, right? We are full human beings, and we want all of us to be able to thrive in all aspects of life. So reach out to us. Before we close out, we did want to ask, are there other topics that you're interested in learning more about? Maybe you want to go deeper into fire, maybe you want to go deeper into a specific strategy that we mentioned, but we want to know so that we can offer content expertise about it in hopes that we can develop something that's helpful to you. So feel free to chat that or unmute. We'd love to hear.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I'm going to just start with some of these comments and questions in the chat. So, Christina asked about, it was really a comment, but I do want to go deeper on this, just that to stay competitive, she has been investing in degrees and credentials, and is excited that we had mentioned that as adding to generational wealth long term. So yeah, and I echo that. I do think that investing in your skills, and that can be with a degree, with another degree, or an advanced degree, or with additional credentials, is worthwhile. But I will say the caveat that I put there is that the degree or the credential in and of itself doesn't do anything until you bring it to market. So you have to be able to market it in some way or use it some way on the job to earn more money, or to leapfrog into a role that earns you more money that you then save and invest in, and all of that. So I have seen, and part of it's because I'm so involved with universities, I do see some people who will get, another degree or take courses or do stuff as a stopgap. They're they're hitting a brick wall with their job search. And so they feel like, oh, this is a good way for me to spend my time. It's only a good way to spend your time, and it's only a good investment if you end up doing something with it. So I'll just put that caveat in there. Did you want to add something to that, Analiza?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we feel like our value comes from our knowledge and these degrees. And so while it's great to be a learner because we want to be learners, when do you know that you're enough? Just like what you have right now with the experience you have, it's plenty actually to go forth and start. So one of the questions we had here, Caroline, was about businesses and consulting. And, it's not like there's 20 different checklists that you have to, be ready to be a coach or a consultant. You already have your experience and your unique value add. Get clear on that and enter from that place. If you truly are hitting a wall where you really need the certification to get into this niche from there, okay. But I wouldn't say, oh, I've got to, get the PhD or like a 2-year degree. And these are very expensive. In fact, let's just go into there. Let's try to get roles. If we hit a roadblock, let's think about that too. So both measure learning and yes, it's a value, but also just start the thing and see how far you can get.
Yeah, the thing that I love about consulting is because you don't have a brick and mortar location or inventory or a staff that you need. And you can focus on really what is my market value and where am I going to find these people. So when I have clients who come to me who are interested in doing that, the first thing that we focus on is getting that first client, because they need to know for themselves that what they're thinking about putting out there actually has a value on it. And sure, we might not get pricing exactly right. And in fact, the very first client might be a free test client, but it's about getting out there in a way that's real and measurable and not postponing the entry point for yet another degree or, another preparation point, something, a notch on my belt rather than, just going ahead. So yeah, I do think that's a good point that you bring up, Analiza. Ruth asked about talking more about the upside of losing the hypothetical $1,000. So yeah, so what I meant by that, and I'm trying to think of, there are a number of people who talk about the barbell strategy. So this notion of that you have risk management in place, that you don't lose everything. The reason why I specifically used $1,000 in my example is because for most of our listeners, I can't vouch for everybody on this call, but I will say that our typical listener and reader is a knowledge professional, middle to senior management. So they are on the upper end of that income, where $1,000 is significant, but it's not going to kill them. Right. So I deliberately used $1,000 to stress that if you lost it all, it would still be, and it would be painful, but it would be an amount of money that you could come back from. I didn't use $100,000 as the example, because I think that once you get there, or even $10,000, boy, you might really, that might be what your 401k contribution is for the entire year. Right. And so the $1,000 is meant to be an amount of money that if you lost it all, while painful, still wouldn't take you out of living day to day. And at the same time, if you invested in something that had a significant upside that might go 10 times or 100 times, that could be very real money for you. So an example of that I did not take advantage of was, I was in circles that were very early on talking about crypto, specifically Bitcoin. And I actually even thought at one point that I would try to accept Bitcoin as payment for coaching services, but it was complicated. This is 10, even, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 years ago. It was complicated to do. So I just kind of didn't think about it anymore. I said, oh, this might be complicated. I'm not going to do it. Now, had I done it, the upside would have been not even 10 times or 100 times. It would have been 1,000 times what I was looking at that point. But I was so focused on Well, the downsides of it are it would take an incredible amount of time. I'm not sure about all the compliance issues. Oh, I could put that money in. I have so many other things that I could potentially put money and time and attention into. And I didn't think enough about, but what if it goes up 1,000 times or 10,000 times? And so that's why I mentioned that example of focusing on the upside is for things where there might be a huge run up. So the friends and family investment with someone that you know who might be the next Jeff Bezos or the next Steve Jobs, right? So it's thinking about that and thinking about, is there a level of investment where if the whole thing went away, it wouldn't be that big of a deal? But if it does pay off, it could be a game changer. That's the significance of the $1,000. Okay. And then just in terms of topics, just I don't know, Annalise, if you can see the chat, but just in terms of topics, it was incorporating the consulting and it was fire for sure. So I just last call for questions because I'm sensitive about people attending on their lunch hour. So it might be the lunch hour for you. We just have a few minutes. If anyone has any additional questions about and stuff that we talked about today, or maybe getting this real for your specific wealth plan or generational wealth plan, now would be the time. And of course, we've included our contact information. You will get a replay of this presentation, so you'll be able to listen again and again. I'll post it up I always post it up for 72 hours, and then we'll go from there. Oh, I of course got a new chat. So, later in life divorce issues and considerations. Yeah, I mean, we kind of glossed over the later in life, so we didn't really go into it. So, both Annalise and I are married. I'll put that disclaimer, right? So I am not going to comment on divorce law or advice or anything like that, but I have had many, more than I, would like. I've had friends who've unfortunately dealt with this issue, later on in life, and it can be incredibly disruptive financially, especially if you've commingled your finances and or you weren't looking at your finances because that was always like your spouse's job or something that they did in the household. I would say that is the biggest danger that I've seen, that I've had friends who they just don't even know where all of their accounts are, what all of the money is, et cetera, and they just haven't thought about it. One thing that I will say about this, because again, I'm married, Annalise is married, so I can't comment on divorce specifically, is I always stress test our financial planning. So I will always think about what happens if something happens to one of our livelihoods, to both of our livelihoods. If the market goes down 10%, 50%, if one of our investments goes to zero, two of our investments goes to zero. So I have things, if inflation goes to hyperinflation, well, hyperinflation is 1,000% inflation, but even if it's 5%, 10%, like what happens to all of our plans? So I encourage people to do that same kind of scenario planning. Just think about if I lost my job tomorrow, if I got divorced, if whatever. And if you don't know if your portfolio will survive, if you realize, oh my gosh, like I actually have no idea where everything is, well, that's a wake-up call to research where everything is. I'm still doing it. I'm still not even done with my estate plan, and I have kids. I have a will in place, I have a trust in place, etc. But in terms of printing out all the documents, making sure that they know where everything is, and because things change over time, I'm still, constantly doing that. And so I would just encourage people to do the same.
I'll just say one thing here, Caroline. I think we should wrap after. You got to look at the numbers, and didn't even highlight this as a strategy, but look at your budget now, look at your expenses, plan for the future, do that crisis management stuff. But it's helpful. I also support social entrepreneurs. And sometimes they're like, I'm ready to quit my job. And I'm like, how much do you need to make? Like, what is that baseline number? If you don't get the business that you hope to get within 6 months, like what's your backup plan? Knowing the numbers is really empowering, because then you know, and you can like protect yourself and make the right decisions. So know your numbers now and in the future, and then plan accordingly.
Great. So thank you so much for everyone who has joined. And I'm seeing in the comments that this was helpful for folks. So Analiza and I are going to do more content around this. And I don't know like what that's going to look like, if it's just going to be blogs, if it's going to be webinars, if it's going to be a course or a book. Analiza, you're a very prolific writer. So I know you're always thinking about the next book. So it might be any number of these things as you think about your own planning needs and just your own advice needs. Let us know what would be helpful. We always love to really be responsive to who our audience is, our listeners, our readers. And thank you so much for joining us. And I will post this replay later on today and send everybody a link, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.